She gave me earbuds as birthday gift. Small, harmless, thoughtful. 3 days later, I learned the earbuds had been listening to me the whole time. By the time I understood why, the police were already on their way. I turned 56 on a Tuesday, the kind of weekday birthday that barely makes a sound. The morning started like any other. Same gray Toledo sky pressing low. Same kitchen light buzzing faintly. Elaine already gone to work, a half-empty coffee pot still warm. I checked the mail out of habit, bills, ads. Then a small box with my name written in careful handwriting. Megan's handwriting, neat and confident. That alone gave me a strange lift. We were never close, just polite, careful. Like people sharing a narrow hallway, I carried the box inside slowly. Sat at the table, opened it without thinking much. White wireless earbuds rested inside. Light plastic, unremarkable. With a short note saying she thought they might make work easier. Happy birthday, Ray, nothing dramatic, no big speech. But it landed heavier than she could have known. Because being remembered feels like proof you still matter. At work, the guy surprised me with a sheet cake and jokes about getting old. I laughed because that is what you do. I told him about the earbuds, passed them around during lunch. Bob made a crack about walkers. Dennis did not smile. He turned one earbud over slowly, then the other. His face drained of color so fast it caught my attention. He asked where I got them. I said my stepdaughter. His jaw tightened. He told me quietly that I needed to take them to the police. Not later, not after dinner, now. I laughed out of reflex because the idea was absurd. Because family does not do things like that. Dennis did not laugh back. He said they had been altered, not in a good way. Something cold settled in my stomach, not fear yet. More like when a boiler makes a noise it never has before. That night I stood in the kitchen staring at the earbuds on the counter. Elaine watched television in the other room. I almost told her everything, but the words stuck. Accusing someone without proof felt wrong, felt dangerous. The next day, I drove to the precinct on my lunch break. The waiting room smelled like burnt coffee. A detective took the earbuds and disappeared. I sat alone listening to my breathing. When he came back, he set them on the table between us. Said they were modified for audio pickup and location data. Asked where I usually wore them. The answer hit harder than the question. Everywhere, home, car, walks, calls. He told me not to confront anyone, to act normal. Driving back to work, my hand shook. I thought about Megan's smile at holidays. About how easy trust makes everything else possible. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. The house still dark, the kind of quiet that feels borrowed. I lay there listening to the furnace click and the refrigerator hum, wondering how many sounds I had made without thinking. How many words had floated into rooms I assumed were empty. At work, I moved slower than usual, checked the same vents twice. Signed forms I had signed 1,000 times. Dennis watched me without saying anything. Not pity, not fear, just awareness. That mattered more than comfort. During lunch, I kept my voice low. Talked about nothing important, weather, sports, broken doors. The ordinary noise of men killing time, but my thoughts kept circling back to the box on my kitchen table. How something so small could shift the ground under you. The call from the detective came in the afternoon. His voice calm, practiced. He explained what the device could do. How it could activate without me touching it. How it could stream audio and location data to someone else. He asked questions slowly. Where I went, who I talked to, what I talked about. Each answer felt like handing over a piece of myself I had already lost. He told me not to change my routine, not to confront anyone, to let things play out. That word routine stuck with me, because routines are what make people invisible. And invisible is where damage hides best. When the call ended, I sat in my office chair staring at the wall. realizing that my life had quietly become something that could be observed. That evening at home, I acted like nothing was wrong. Elaine asked about my day. I said fine. We ate dinner, watched television, the normal script. But every casual question felt heavier. Every pause felt exposed. I noticed the earbuds where I had left them. Small and white against the counter, they looked harmless, almost friendly. I thought about how easy it would have been to put them on, to never know, to slowly hand over my routines one conversation at a time. Instead, I left them there and went to bed, staring at the ceiling, understanding something important for the first time. Danger does not always rush in. Sometimes it waits patiently for you to invite it in yourself. By the third day, the fear had settled into something heavier. Not panic, not anger, more like pressure behind the eyes that never quite fades. I drove to work with the radio off. Listening to the tires on wet pavement, every sound felt sharper. Like my brain was testing what belonged and what did not. I kept thinking about the question the detective asked, "Where do you usually wear them?" And how easily I had answered, "Everywhere." That word followed me through the morning. Everywhere means nowhere is safe. Everywhere means there is no off switch. At work, I caught myself almost whispering to myself out of habit. Then stopping, embarrassed even though I was alone. That was when I realized how much of my life existed out loud. Dennis found me near the loading dock mid-morning. He did not ask questions, he just nodded once. A small motion that said he knew enough, that he was paying attention. That helped more than advice would have. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. It was the detective again. He explained that the modifications were intentional, not random. Someone had planned this carefully. He said they were not just listening for gossip. They were mapping routines, patterns, locations. He spoke slowly, like he did not want to rush me past the meaning. I leaned against the brick wall outside the hospital and felt the cold seep through my jacket. Routines. That meant mornings, drives, habits I never questioned. It meant someone else knew when I was alone and when I was not. When I got home that night, Elaine was sorting mail at the kitchen counter. She looked tired, distracted. I almost told her everything, almost laid it all out. But the detective's words echoed in my head. Do not confront. Do not change anything. So I asked casually if Megan had called. Elaine said no, shrugged, went back to the envelopes. My chest tightened slowly, not from fear but from understanding. Silence was now part of the job. That night after Elaine went to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen staring at the earbuds. Small and ordinary, I picked them up, felt how light they were, how easily they fit in the palm of my hand. I thought about trust, about how often we accept things without asking why. I set them back down and turned off the light. Lying in bed, listening to the house breathe, knowing something had already shifted, not in my surroundings, but in me. Because once you realize you are being watched, you do not move the same way again. The next morning, I made a decision that sat heavy in my chest. I put the earbuds in, not because I wanted to, but because not knowing felt worse. They slid into place easily, light, and comfortable, which almost made me angry. I moved through the kitchen, talking the way I always had, commenting on the furnace noise, the coffee tasting weak, the neighbor's dog barking too early. My voice stayed steady, even when my hands did not. Elaine walked past in her socks and said, "Good morning." I answered normally. That normal took effort. Every word felt measured, every pause deliberate. I left the house wondering if someone else was listening to the same sounds, the same small moments, collecting them like pieces of a map. At work, I treated it like a system test. That was the only way I could keep my head straight. I talked to myself while walking the mechanical floor. Mentioned a friend thinking about selling a Florida place. Said maybe I would roll the money into something safer. A trust maybe. The words felt fake coming out of my mouth. But I said them anyway, quietly, casually, the way I always talk to myself. Hours passed, nothing happened. That silence was worse than an immediate reaction. It made my stomach twist. Then just after lunch, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. It was Megan, her tone light, almost playful. She asked if I was still thinking about selling that Florida place. Said it came up in conversation. My fingers went cold around the phone. But my face stayed calm. I typed back slowly. Said I was still figuring things out. Then I put the phone down and went back to work. Fixed the door, filled out a form, let routine hide the shaking in my hands. That evening, Megan showed up at the house with soup. Said she was just in the area. Elaine seemed pleased, surprised. Megan watched me more than her food. Asked if I was tired, if work was stressful, if I was keeping up with appointments. Her concern sounded right but landed wrong. Every question felt aimed, like she was checking boxes. I answered carefully, vague where I could be, honest where I had to be. The earbuds felt warm in my ears, like they were alive. After she left, Elaine said Megan was just trying to be nice. I nodded, but something inside me had hardened. Because the timing was too clean, the interest too sudden. That night lying in bed, I understood this was no accident. It was a test. And by reacting at all, Megan had failed it. The hardest part was not fear. It was accepting that someone I trusted was listening, and thinking she was being careful when she was not careful enough. I did not find the paperwork all at once. It came quietly, the way trouble usually does. One evening, there was a plain envelope from the bank half buried under grocery flyers. I opened it without thinking. Inside was a notice about an upcoming home equity review appointment. A date I did not recognize. My stomach tightened slowly. I asked Elaine about it casually. She hesitated just a beat too long. Then said Megan mentioned interest rates and thought the bank might be reaching out. Her voice was light. But the pause stayed with me. That pause mattered, because it told me someone had been talking when I had not. The next morning, I went down to the basement under the excuse of checking the furnace. The old filing cabinet sat where it always had, indented, dusty, full of years. I opened drawers I had not touched in a long time. Manuals, tax returns, expired policies. Then I saw a folder that did not belong. Too clean, too new. Inside were printed documents. Not signed, but ready. Power of attorney templates. Guardianship petitions, capacity evaluations. Words that made my hands go numb. There were notes in the margins in Megan's handwriting. Short phrases, efficient, date circled, doctor visit soon. I sat on the basement steps reading everything slowly, understanding this was not about helping. This was about replacing me without asking. That afternoon, I drove to the bank on my lunch break. I did not accuse. I asked polite questions. The kind that do not raise alarms. The loan officer admitted someone had called claiming to help her stepfather manage finances. No authorization on file. Just concern. That word again. Concern. When I left, I sat in my car with the engine off, feeling the weight settle fully for the first time. This was not curiosity, not worry. It was a plan. And it had been moving forward quietly while I was fixing doors and eating lunch in the same chair every day. I called the detective from the parking lot and told him everything. When he said this was dangerous combined with surveillance, I finally understood the shape of the trap. It was not meant to scare me. It was meant to make me disappear politely. After that, the pressure changed shape. It stopped feeling like observation and started feeling like guidance. Megan checked in more often, offered rides, reminders, help with forms, her words always soft, always reasonable. She talked about making things easier, about reducing stress, about how hard it is to watch someone struggle. Elaine began repeating pieces of it without realizing, suggesting Megan come to appointments, saying it might be good to have help with paperwork. Each comment landed like a small weight added to my chest. Not crushing, just steady. I nodded more than I spoke, because arguing would have made me sound defensive. And defensive would have fit the story being built about me. I kept wearing the earbuds just enough to keep the line open, talking out loud in the car, in the garage, in the basement, about being tired, about forms giving me headaches, about being glad Elaine handled more things now. Every sentence tasted wrong, like I was sanding down parts of myself. But the responses came fast, Megan texting within hours, sometimes minutes, asking if I was okay, suggesting next steps, mentioning making things official. That phrase, again and again, official, authority without saying the word. One night Elaine folded laundry and said Megan was just worried, that I did not have to be so stubborn cut deeper than she knew, because it meant the ground was shifting under me, and she did not see it. That night, I drove to the hospital parking lot and sat with the engine running. Watching my breath fog the windshield, I thought about all the years I had kept that place running. The systems I understood better than people. No one ever called me forgetful when the heat stayed on in February. I called Dennis and asked him if I was losing my mind. He said no without hesitation. Then helped me organize everything. Dates, messages, notes, printed copies, backups. He said paper keeps people from disappearing. That stayed with me, because disappearing was exactly what this was designed to do. Not loudly, not violently, but slowly, with help, concern, and just enough doubt planted in the right places to make everyone else step aside while it happened. The mistake came from exhaustion, not anger. I had gone days measuring every word, every pause, pretending to be smaller than I was. And it wore me down. One evening after work, I sat in the car and stared at my phone too long. When Megan called, I answered without thinking it through. My voice was too direct, too clean. I asked why she had been talking to the bank about my house. There was a pause on the line, long enough for me to know I had crossed the line. She said she was just trying to help, that Elaine had asked her to. Then the call ended. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from knowing I had just broken the rhythm. Silence after that felt louder than any argument. For 2 days nothing happened, no texts, no calls, no surprise visits. I was sure I had tipped her off and ruined everything. I replayed the call over and over, thinking about tone, about timing, about how close I had come to handing her an excuse to take everything underground. Then the email arrived. Subject line calm and professional, next steps. She wrote about scheduling a meeting at the bank, about how it would be easier if we all sat down together. She attached a list of documents I should bring. At the bottom, she added that she had talked to Elaine and that this was for the best. My hand shook, but not from fear, from clarity. This was the move. The moment she believed she was close enough to close the door. I forwarded everything to the detective and to the bank fraud department. This time, the response was different. Quicker, sharper. Meetings were scheduled, but not the kind Megan expected. That night, Elaine cried when I finally told her the truth. Not loud, just quiet tears that soaked into her sweater. She kept saying she did not know, that she thought she was helping. I told her I knew, and I meant it. But knowing did not fix what had already cracked. I barely slept, not from panic, but from the weight of what was coming. Public things change people. And by morning, I understood that patience had carried me this far. And now it was time to let facts do the rest of the work. The days leading up to the meeting moved slowly. Like time had thickened, I dressed the same. Left the house at the same hour. Checked the same systems at work. Everything steady on the surface. Underneath, my chest stayed tight. The detective called once to confirm details. Calm voice, careful words. He told me to bring nothing extra. To answer questions only when asked. To let the room do the work. that was harder than it sounded, because every instinct I had wanted to explain, to justify, to defend myself before anyone asked. But defense looks like guilt when you are already being framed as confused. Elaine barely spoke those days, not out of anger, more out of shock. Like she was replaying conversations in her head and hearing them differently now. I did not push her. Pressure had already done enough damage. The night before the meeting, I laid out my clothes carefully. Nothing new, nothing dramatic, just clean and familiar. I took the earbuds out of the drawer and held them for a moment. Light, smooth, harmless looking. I thought about how much noise they had carried without ever making a sound. Then I put them in my coat pocket, not because I needed them, but because they belonged to the story whether I liked it or not. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early and waited in my car, watching people go in and out of the bank. Couples arguing quietly, tellers laughing behind glass. Ordinary life, moving through an ordinary building. It struck me how many decisions that change everything are made in places like this. Not courtrooms, not hospitals, but quiet rooms with bad coffee and neutral walls. When it was time, I went inside and followed the investigator down the hall. My hands were steady, not because I was calm, but because there was nothing left to decide. The trap was already set, and for the first time since my birthday, I was not the one being tested anymore. The conference room was smaller than I expected. A long table, neutral walls. Coffee that smelled burnt before anyone touched it. Megan arrived first, wearing a blazer and confidence. She barely looked at me when I came in. Just nodded like this was a formality. Elaine sat beside her. Hands folded tight, looking tired. The investigator introduced herself and began calmly, sliding papers toward Megan. Not me, emails, call logs, appointment requests. Megan answered smoothly at first, said she was helping, said I was overwhelmed, said concern again. Then the word capacity entered the room, and everything shifted. Elaine looked up sharply, confusion cracking through her face. The investigator placed the guardianship documents on the table, the notes in Megan's handwriting visible. The recorder clicked on, and my voice filled the room. Shaky, uncertain, talking about forgetting things. About needing help, Megan's face went pale. She demanded to know where the audio came from. The detective answered quietly, from the device you gave him. The earbuds were placed between us. Right in the center, Megan stood up too fast. Said this was ridiculous, that I hated her, that I was twisting things. I stayed seated, said I did not hate her, said I trusted her. That word trust landed harder than shouting would have. Megan started talking fast then. Defensive, angry, explaining stress, debt. How hard it was to watch someone decline. How she was only protecting her mother. The investigator slid one final email across the table. Printed clean and clear, once he signs, everything gets easier. He will not even realize what he is losing. The room went quiet. Elaine covered her mouth. Megan's shoulders sagged just enough. The detective stood and asked Megan to come with him. No handcuffs, no raised voices, just consequence arriving on time. As she looked back at me and said I did this, I met her eyes steady and said no. You did, and for the first time in days, my hands did not shake. The house felt different when I got home. Same walls, same ticking clock, but the air was lighter. Like something stale had finally been let out. Elaine did not come home that night. She stayed with her sister, and I did not stop her. We both needed space to sit with what could not be undone. I made soup from a can and ate standing at the counter, listening to the furnace cycle on and off. The quiet settled in slowly, not the nervous kind, the honest kind. The kind that lets you hear yourself think again. The weeks after moved forward without drama, lawyers, passwords, paperwork. All the things you never notice until they're turned against you. The detective checked in once, careful not to promise anything. But his tone told me enough. At work, life returned to routine. Boilers broke, doors stuck. Dennis asked if I was okay. I said I was getting there, and that was true. Elaine and I talked eventually. Not all at once, just pieces, apologies, silences. Understanding that some things bend and never quite straighten again. I did not rush forgiveness. Patience had already done its work. I stopped using wireless earbuds, went back to the old wired kind that tug if you move too far. They remind you that connections have limits. Sometimes late at night I think about how close I came to disappearing quietly. Not with shouting or force, but with forms, concern, and a smile. That is what stays with me, not the money, not even the betrayal. But how quietly it almost worked. If you are listening to this and thinking it could never happen to you, I thought that too. All it took was one gift I did not question. So pay attention when something feels off, especially when it comes wrapped in kindness, because patience, silence, and evidence are sometimes the only things standing between you and being erased without a sound.